At $200, a Super Nintendo setup costs twice as much as the old system. For the money, the company promises better pictures, sound, and adventure. Now you're playing with power, superpower. You're the king, I tell you! The king!
Only for Super NES.
Only on Super NES.
You're listening to the SNES Podcast with your host, Soul Blazer.
Hello, everybody. This is the Super NES Podcast, episode number 205. I am Greg, joined always by Joe.
Hi.
And in this one, we're giving you a treat. We're giving you not one, not two, but three games all bundled together in one episode because all three games are very, very similar, and they're all from the same franchise. Joe wanted to look at the Super NES games that came out that covered the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers TV show and movie. So we're looking at three games that came out with the system in this one episode, which is Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, Mighty Morphin Power Rangers the movie, and Mighty Morphin Power Rangers the Fighting Edition.
I just want to jump in and say that at some point we'll cover the Zeo racing game, but that is definitely not today because of the fact that, that is a continuation of the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers franchise. So yeah, we decided not to do that fourth game.
I never even heard of that game. Did that one come out in the U.S.?
It did come out in the U.S.
Oh, okay. All right. So, I think we've talked. We've talked a little bit about Mighty Morphin Power Rangers before in the past. Because of my age, I just simply did not watch the show. I knew of the show, of course, but I really don't have an experience with it, and therefore I never played these games before in the past. This is my first time playing these games. Joe, I know, is a little bit younger than me, so he does have some exposure like the show, and also the games. Like Joe was saying off mic that he was more familiar with growing up with the Genesis version of the game, yes. which there are some reports, some were totally different games, from what I understand.
So originally the Genesis got a fighting game that tried to be Street Fighter and didn't do a very good job of it. It was a great game for what it was, but it definitely did not do a very good job as far as being the Street Fighter clone that it wanted to be. And then eventually we got a Mighty Morphin Power Rangers the movie game, which is very much like the one here on the Super Nintendo.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And actually, by the time the movie game came out, I kind of was done with Power Rangers. So I only experienced the fighting game firsthand, at the time. The movie game I experienced down the road. Okay.
And did you have any experience at all, like of the fighting game?
I had no experience with any of the Super Nintendo games.
Okay.
This was all not really the first time I've played through these, because, like I said, many times before on this podcast, when emulation became a thing in the early 2000s, late 1990s, I got exposed to a bunch of stuff that I just, had never come across before. And so I would touch things here and there, but never really in depth. So this is really the more or less the first time I've gone in depth with all three of these games.
Okay, well, same here then. So, but so that's cool. But so of course, we can't talk about the games without talking about the franchise itself a little bit. And it's surprising to me. Maybe it should be surprising to me, but it is surprising to me that this is a franchise that 30 years later is still going strong. I mean, it's like Transformers and TMNT. It's like it won't die.
Yep, you got it.
But actually, the history of the franchise and how it came to be is very fascinating. There's several very good podcasts and/or YouTube videos out there for anybody interested. It's actually how the franchise actually how the idea for the show came to be and how it was made, how it's evolved over the years is actually very interesting. So I do recommend that anybody who's interested give that a watch or listen. You can easily find stuff like online because it's actually like quite fascinating. It's also like like marketing genius. How that came about, because the show originally came about in August '93. That's when it debuted on Fox. I'm mentioning the date here because that does come into play with these games later on down the road a bit. And like the original idea for it was actually like pretty genius, because it's like, you take snippets of a Japanese take snippets of a Japanese superhero fighting show, which have all been the rage in Japan for many years before this.
Mm-hmm.
I mean even today there's still a dime a dozen.
Yeah.
They can just grab some kids off the street, record some very hokey, low budget, scenes scenes of them to spice them like the Japanese fighting scenes, and voila, you've got a show. So it was very low budget, very cheap to make, but the show did very, very well. And I guess it was I guess the show really did well, partly because of timing on the market, because anime was really starting to take off in popularity on time period, especially since and many people hadn't seen these Japanese scenes before, though, which obviously were far and away better than the cheap ass American produced segments that they had to stitch things together. But I think also the characters, at least, also helped, being teens, having their own lives, deal with that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
I think I think it also helped to add some humility and calm to day-to-day life, to a life that was different from any other forms of animation and fiction out there time period. It's kind of the same reason Spider-Man was so popular when he was introduced in the 60s. Exactly right. So I think the show, as hokey and low budget and cheap as it is, and laughable, I do think it's laughable. I'm sorry, but
it is laughable.
But having said that, I do respect it for what it was able to do, and just those factors it was able to hit upon. And over the years, of course, they changed the formula a little bit over the years. The American scenes have gotten better. More money and attention got put into them. The uniforms improved. The quality got better. So, they did different things. The Japanese segments to make them fit in better and not seem like so jerky. So, and from younger friends of mine, I understand the newer shows are actually pretty good. From what I've been told. So I mean, obviously the franchise has a big fan base. So wouldn't be around 30 years later.
Right.
Did you want to? So I know you watched. So I know you at least watched some of the show as opposed to me, Joe. Did you want to add anything?
Yeah.
Did you want to add anything to that?
So the idea of taking a Japanese show and turning it into an American show has been around since probably, in my guess, would be the 70s with
exactly.
Robotech and things like that.
Right. Yeah.
Eventually, we got Transformers. Voltron was infamous for taking elements of Go Lion and turning it into what we came to
There was
know
also
as Voltron.
there's also a Speed Racer too, right?
Yes. Yep. So, I mean, it wasn't a new concept, but using the live action, I think, was a bigger gamble, because technically, you're stuck with just the costume characters. You can't, and the monsters, obviously, but anything that shows human flesh, you can't just take that concept. You have to actually create your own to go with everything else. So it was an interesting concept at the beginning. I highly recommend Dan Larson's Secret Galaxy YouTube channel.
Yes, that's a good one.
He breaks down, it was about 3 years ago, he broke down Mighty Morphin Power Rangers. But more recently, he's broken down Beetleborgs, and another one that got cannibalized here, Gundam. So, there's definitely a history of us taking Japanese properties and trying to make money off them for sure. And I mean, they're just as bad because they've taken like Ninja Turtles and made like, you know, the crazy like Mecha Turtles things, but that's a totally different story.
Yeah, Star Wars also.
Yeah, it's like there's definitely some trading of intellectual properties between the two of us, and it's
Oh yeah,
fantastic.
definitely. So.
But yeah, so I mean, like I got it. It's like this is like what 94, 95. So
We'll get into that. Yeah,
I'm
but
like,
yeah,
like
yeah,
the
yeah.
games I know were 95, but I'm thinking the TV show came out like a year before. So like
93.
Okay, 93. So I'm like 12. Like I'm to the point where like I'm starting to see females for more than just having cooties. My action figures are not as cool as they were before. Other things like the NES have come into my life. 92. Yeah, 92 I still had the NES. I didn't get the Genesis until 95. So like
I have heard a lot of people say, like around your age, that Kimberly Ann Hart, who played the Pink Ranger, was one of their like first like crushes. So
yeah, so like I was a weird kid. So like like I would love to say Kimberly Hart was my first crush, but she wasn't. Like I you know, like I just recently put on Facebook with Raquel Welch's passing. Like I've seen old movies with Raquel Welch. So like Raquel Welch and Carrie Fisher as Princess Leia, especially in that slave outfit. Like those were like the early like prepubescent like feelings that I had. So by the time I got to Kimberly, I mean, like I knew she's an actress, and I'm not going to ever be able to get any of that. So like I don't know, like I just didn't have that. I didn't have that lust that I had before. You know what I mean? Like it had already happened to me. But yeah. So, anyways, yeah, that's all I'm adding to Power Rangers.
Yeah, so like I said, we'll also say that Simon Whistler also did a video on the Power Rangers for his like for his like Today I Found Out channel, which is also a great short watch. If you just want a short summary of the whole phenomenon, that's a good watch.
Also, like he's very he's not objective because he wasn't there. It wasn't his thing. So it's very journalistic the way he covers it, which is fantastic. Yeah. And I love Dan Larson, and he puts in fantastic comedy into his videos, but he's also got a bias because like he grew up watching all that stuff. He's a big
and
he's a big man nerd like I am.
Yeah, and fan versus non-fan is an important element. There's an important element also that we're going to talk about here, like we get into the games here in a moment, for sure. I think because that's I'm glad you mentioned that, Joe, because that's a very important thing. Yes, like important factor to bring up. We probably should mention real quick here before moving on that unfortunately this is also a franchise that's associated having like a curse with it because a lot of actors and actresses who have been on the show over the years have not had the best luck, unfortunately. Let's just say, a lot of bad things have happened to them, sadly. Yeah. So, which is like, I don't believe in curses. It's like, there have been, when you have a show, when you have a franchise, I should probably say because there are multiple shows. You have a franchise that's going on for as long as this one has, and you get, like that many people associated with it. Obviously, odds are that certain bad things are going to happen to them, unfortunately.
Correct.
But it does seem to be more heavily slanted. But I think it's just more like because of like, I think you're also playing into the fact that a lot of these people were very young and inexperienced when they started on the show, and fame came to them quickly, and young people who are not trained or not used to dealing with fame can affect their lives in bad ways, unfortunately. So I think that's also another factor that plays into it as well too. So, So it's like I think more people probably know about the curses than than the show itself these days, which is also something which is also pretty unfortunate. But yeah. Anyway, having moved on, the show was success. The show was success almost right away. So Bandai, who had the rights to publish the Mighty Morphin Power Ranger stuff, like in the U.S., the Western markets, the toys, etc., wanted to get the game to production pretty quickly. So So all three Super NES games were developed by Natsume, actually, which is actually who's probably best known for the Harvest Moon franchise. So. And Natsume's not mentioned anywhere in the credits that they actually did the work for this, but it shows. I think because Natsume is a pretty good developer. They knew they were doing their programming, so it's I think that the games are better than they probably had a right to be, considering how limited in scope that they are and how rushed in the market that they were, because Bandai didn't pick a crap developer to make these games. They actually did it. They actually picked somebody with some experience and competence, and it shows here. So
yeah, and I think it really shows in the fighting game, which we'll get to, but yeah, I think that's where it really shines.
Right. Obviously, other companies developed other versions of the game, but Natsume was the one who's responsible for the Super NES game. So, Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, the first game, came out pretty fast, all things considering the show started in July '93. That's why I mentioned the date earlier, because the game came out on the Super NES and in Genesis in November of '94. So that's turnaround time of about a year and 3 months after the show first came out, which is pretty good. So they got this in development pretty quickly. As Joe mentioned, the Super NES and Genesis versions of the game are two totally different games. Probably decided because of the rush development cycle. The Genesis version of the game is a fighting game, whereas the Super NES and Game Boy game is a side-scrolling action game. So there also was a Game Gear and Sega CD version of the game as well too. The Game Gear version is more of a the Game Gear version's kind of weird. It's similar to the Genesis version, but it also has some differences to it.
Yeah.
So the Sega CD version is totally a different beast in and of itself. That is a full motion video QuickTime event game.
Yeah, that plays like Dragon's Lair, but worse because it's so true. Because I've recently played the Sega CD game. You could pretty much not touch anything,
Sure.
and it just proceeds. It just plays through. You literally bought an episode of Power Rangers when you bought that CD.
Right. So Super NES. Yeah, so Super NES game, as I mentioned before, is a side-scrolling action game. There's 7 stages altogether in the game. You're able to pick 5 characters at the start of the game. Most of the major characters of the game, although the Green Ranger's missing, the Green Ranger's is only playable in Genesis and Game Gear versions of the game for some reason. So it plays like your typical side-scrolling action game. There's nothing really unique here about this game. You have a life bar. You have your actions. You have your actions that you can do. Like your bomb attack. I do like the fact that some of the gameplay is done out of suit, where the flavor half the game is done in suit.
Yeah.
That's that's pretty cool. At least they leverage that at least to give the game some uniqueness to it. So
yeah, the game very much follows what would be a typical episode. So
sure,
Power Rangers have an issue. The putties come in. They fight the putties as their regular human form. Then the big bad comes, and they have to morph and use that extra power. And that's pretty much what happens here. Through the regular level, you are unmorphed, beating up putties and whatever else, and then you get to the boss, you morph, and then you fight that boss. Or in I think there's at least 2 occasions where you have a Zord battle. So
yes.
For the most part, you're fighting as the Power Rangers or Ranger, whoever you choose.
Yeah.
Both unmorphed and morphed, and then you have a brief moment in which you are able to use the Megazord.
Right. Yeah. So, option screen for this game is pretty standard. Like for most of these games, there's there's both a normal and a hard setting, and you're also able to change the sound level. Pretty much about it.
Yeah.
So, like most action games, it's fairly short if you know what you're doing. Most playthroughs on YouTube are around 45 to 50 minutes. Yep. So, my impressions, it's very competently programmed. It's Natsume, like I said before, they knew what they were doing with this game because, even though it's rushed, it feels it's a solid enough game at the programming level. The controls are good. Everything works the way it's supposed to. It's a very competently put together fighting game. It's not special, I think, because again, probably because of the rush development cycle. Natsume did put in some elements of the show that they could into the game, but it's not something. But it's not like a particularly amazing experience as far as that goes. I thought the game overall was fairly easy though. Maybe it was designed that way on purpose because the show was aimed toward kids. So, but as far as most side-scrolling action games I played, I thought the difficulty was kind of on the low side.
Yeah, so I mean, it's cool that you get the 5 original Rangers. Clearly, this was put into production soon after they saw the results of either the pilot or the first episode.
The first season is like what's based on. Yeah.
When they saw that blow up, they clearly were like, "All right, we need a game." So that's why you get the 5 original. You don't get Tommy yet. There's no Natsume kind of took the easy way out on this one. So there's no distinction between the female and the male Power Rangers.
True.
In the show, Kimberly, granted, is the only one who has the skirt uniform because in the Japanese show, Trini was a male. So there's a nice little factoid.
I did not know that. Okay.
Yeah, Kimberly's the only one with a skirt because she was the actual female ranger in the Japanese version.
Okay.
Other than that, I mean, this is your typical walk to the right, beat up the enemies, get to the boss, beat the boss, move on.
Yeah.
I didn't find it to be that difficult.
Right.
I actually watched a review online where they were like, "Oh, the difficulty is actually pretty good on this," and I'm like, "What? Were you playing blindfolded?" Because that would increase the difficulty. But even if you had issues with, say, the first level, trying to, I don't know, you can't figure out the controls for some reason. I don't know. I can't think of a good reason why you wouldn't get it. This game
it can take a bit to get used to the game.
It's your typical beat 'em up. It's this is very repetitive. It's the same thing over and over again. Do they get an A+ for the realism and keeping with the show? I'd give it a B-.
That's all I think.
This is passable for sure, especially since it was rushed.
It could have been a lot worse. Let's put it that way.
And and to be fair, there's 7 levels, which is typical for most beat 'em ups. The cast of characters they chose is actually pretty cool. Bones, Eye Guy, Gnarly Gnome, the Genie, the Dark Warrior, Matitis, I think is his name, and then Cyclopsis, which Cyclopsis and Matosis are the 2 that you fight as the Megazord.
Right.
And I felt that, having watched the show, especially the first couple seasons, and then playing this game, I felt they represented the show very well. I felt they picked the right kind of bad guys to be able to have in the game. And overall, as repetitive and predictable as it was, I enjoyed it. And I really think that, some of the areas pop. You know what I mean? Especially that last level when you're on the moon. It's fantastic. Yeah. Great backgrounds. You can see Rita's little, castle back there and whatnot. So, I mean, there's definitely some details there that if you're looking and you know what to look for, they're there. But this is their first outing as far as with the Power Rangers franchise, and it shows. The movie game, as we will get into, definitely steps it up at least a little bit.
Those are great points. I pretty much agree with all those. I thought the graphics of this game look pretty good. I mean, for an early Super NES game, the graphics are fine. The characters look pretty close to real life counterparts.
Yeah.
So I thought so the character models very nice.
And to be fair, I mean, this goes for all three games. Graphics and sound are top notch for all three games.
I was shocked to hear the actual Mighty Morphin Power Ranger song play with vocals at the start of the game.
Oh, yeah.
It's like, whoa, Super NES game has vocals. Wow. But, so, at least they put in that touch.
Yeah,
very
they
nice.
wanted to make sure you knew you were playing a Power Rangers game.
Yeah, the music. Yeah, the music's pretty good. I don't know if they took any music from the show besides the opening song, but the music of this game I thought was appropriate. I mean, it's typical fighting music. It fits. So
yeah, I didn't notice anything that jumped out as okay, I remember that from whatever episode. But you're right. All the tracks in the game sound like they belong, in a Power Rangers episode or game. They knew the source material, which rightfully so. Natsume is based in Japan. This is based on the 15th season of Super Sentai. So they've had this for 15 years. They know the franchise. They know everything about it. They just had to, tweak it for the American audience.
Yeah, drop in the American characters,
right.
But yes, I agree with you. Could the game have been better? Sure, but I think that, it could have been a lot worse too, because if Bandai gone somebody else who didn't really know what they were doing,
right.
Considering the rush development cycle and how this game was clearly just a cash tie-in for the show, but it's a competent game. It's I think this is this is what I go back to before saying fan versus non-fan, because I think obviously a fan's gonna enjoy these three games a lot more than non-fan is.
Yes.
Having said that, I think a kid or somebody who doesn't do very good at fighting games, side-scroll action games, probably could this is probably a decent decent game to start with, because it's the low difficulty factor. So
yep, absolutely.
Most of the reviews on the game contemporary said the same things. They gave it kind of the mixed reviews. You picked them on the same things that we did. Pretty good for the fans. Otherwise just very average.
Yeah.
EGM gave it a 6.5 out of 10. Nintendo magazine system gave 77 out of 100. So average ratings for the game. So, but anyway, so that's the first game. That's the first game going on. We will cover cheats, because there are codes for all three of these games, and also give you pricing. The app. So it didn't take very long for the next game to come out either. So the film came out in June 1995, almost 2 years after the show first debuted.
Yeah.
And this time Bandai gave Natsume some time, because they wanted the game based on the movie to come out about the same time the movie did, and they pretty much succeeded, because the game came out in North America in July of 1995, so right about the same time.
Mm-hmm.
I should also mention real quick. I forgot to mention about the first game, the Power Rangers game, that the Super NES version at least got a worldwide release too. It also got released in PAL, PAL Japan as well. So the Genesis version of the game only got released on North American Euro. For the movie game, because they had like more time, they wanted the four games, Super NES, Genesis, Game Boy, and Game Gear, to be more similar to each other, and they are more similar to each other. There are of course differences still, but because the games are held at the same time on a more, I don't want to say relaxed time schedule, but at least like a more generous time.
Right.
The games do play more similar to one another. At least. So while the game's kind of in theory based on the movie, they also heavily feature the game also heavily features characters and plot elements like the second season of the TV show as well. So why they did that, I'm not sure. Maybe just to flesh the game out more, or have more ideas and inspiration to draw from, make for a better game. I've not seen the movie, so I can't really comment on that. But the game is pretty similar. The game is pretty similar in play to like the first game. One difference is that you are able to play this game with 2 players, as opposed to 1. Yep. So that's nice. There's 6 characters in the roster now as opposed to 5. So you have like Billy and Kimmy from the previous game. Tommy's also introduced in this game. Yep. You also have like 3 new like rookie rangers as well too. So there's also the actual
Rocky, Aisha, and Adam, by the way.
Yes, yeah. So you actually you actually have a morphing meter in this one instead. So why don't you talk about the gameplay of this one, the differences, Joe?
Yeah. So this game is very much like the same as the first, but I think this game added in a lot of variety, 2 typical upgrades that you'd be looking for a sequel to the first game. And I really think this one's a little more balanced and has at least it's easy, but it's also like there is a bit of a challenge there. Just there's not too much of it. I mean, for us that are seasoned with beat 'em ups, like we're just gonna breeze through this, but it's a little bit more difficult than the first game.
Yes.
That being said, I really like that now you have to collect lightning bolts to fill up your morphing meter, which gives you the opportunity to, during those regular stages, when you're beating up putties and regular fodder, that you can turn into a Power Ranger and then you just become stronger and quicker. There's snowboarding and skateboarding levels, or I should say sections. Those feel great. They kind of feel shoehorned in. Like I really feel like they were like, oh, hey, Turtles in Time, they did that thing, and that was really cool, and that's a great way to pad our game. So let's do that. And that might be exactly what happened. I don't know, but I still enjoyed what they had here to offer. Again, the list of enemies and bosses I find interesting because of the fact that there is only one, count them, one that is actually in the movie. The rest are nowhere to be found in the movie.
The final boss, like I was just like from the movie.
Yeah. So I found it interesting because they had like Mirror Maniac, Cannon Top, Skelerina, Major Brain, Silverhorn, Mainframe, and then Ivan Ooze. And there are mini bosses that are also mixed in with these guys. So there's like a flying droid that you attack. That's like the first mini boss. They considered it a boss, but I don't. To me, it's a stronger enemy that happens to be on the field. But because there's only one, I guess technically it's a mini boss. There's one at one point when you're on the train. You got to beat up like some like train thing. It's they made the right changes. They definitely padded this out. It is slightly better than the first game, but I mean, in the end, like as a Power Rangers movie game, I feel it dropped the ball because Ivan Ooze is the only bad guy, and they had a couple, quote unquote evil Zords in the movie, so they could have definitely included them as if they really wanted filler, as bosses leading up to Ivan Ooze. So overall, I mean, it follows the plot. It's not horrible, but it's just more of the same. It really is.
Yeah, I agree with most of what you're saying there. Natsume definitely did some very curious design choices with this game because it's like, for example, the bosses, the first 5 bosses, like all canon bosses, like in the show. Mm-hmm. The 6th boss they created from scratch. It's like so why they felt the need to create a new boss when they had plenty of people or monsters or whatever that they could pick like was showing the movie. I'm not sure.
Right, and then give it the cheesy name Mainframe. Like, come on.
Yes, yeah. And also, like you just mentioned, the Zords don't show up like in this game.
Yeah.
You see one in the ending, but
right.
But at least the first game had Zords as bosses. This one doesn't. So, it's very curious. It's like So like, I don't know why Natsume did some of the design choices that they made, but having said that, I agree with you. I think that the game does have better gameplay. I like the new elements added to the game, both like the morphing ability, the ability, whatnot. The music in this game did have remixes, hard rock remixes, like the original TV show, which is nice. So, the game is a little bit harder. I agree with you with that. A little bit harder than the first game. Still somewhat easy, but at least still somewhat easy. Yeah. But on the option screen, if you change it to hard as opposed to normal, at least that way, I felt like it was getting like more of a challenge. So it's like again, this is a cash grab, and again, I agree with you that I'm not really sure. Just the name of the movie on the game box, and when the movie really didn't have too much to do with this game, is again more of a marketing thing. Yeah. But having said that, as a sequel, it's pretty good. It's like I do think this was I do agree with you that this game is a little bit better than the first game as far as the actual the overall game difficulty, and the new stuff added to this game I think like a bit better. The snowboarding stage is actually playing pretty fun.
Yeah.
And some of the boss fights in this game, I thought the boss fights were better in this game. Also overall.
Yeah, for sure.
So
and the other thing I wanted to mention is that like graphically, this game looks very much like the first. As far as the sprite work is done, I felt the backgrounds were slightly better in this one.
Yeah, sprites are also like a little bit larger,
yeah,
like a little bit more like zoomed in, so it flags more detail. Not really too much different as far as the graphics go. So, but yeah, like better graphics, better music. Like overall, I thought this was like a better game. They did use real quick. Yeah, they also used very low res pictures, but they are pictures. The characters themselves this time. So I will give them credit for that too.
Yeah.
So.
I mean, this game holds up pretty well in my opinion, considering the time that has passed. I cannot say the same for the movie itself. The movie itself relies on a lot of early CGI.
I'm sure it does. Yeah.
Boy, is it brutal. I mean, it's one thing to like look at it as like it's an extended Power Ranger episode, so it's got its own cheesiness and whatever else, but like it's got that Hollywood polish, but also like the CGI. There's so many things I could say, but there's quite a few times where like you have Zords fighting Zords towards the end of the movie, and it is just a super CGI fest, and it's like it's not even like one of those like where it blends into the background and it looks realistic. No, like these things legit look like CGI Zords pasted onto a green screen. It's not great. It really isn't.
Doesn't matter if CGI is game or movie. CGI is one of those things where it's like it can look great when it comes out, and then 20 years later you're like, oh man, that's rough.
Yeah.
But,
it's one of those like I had recently gone back and watched this probably about 6 months ago. I sat down to watch the movie.
Right.
Just because it was one of those like I have the DVD and it was like, I haven't watched it in a while. Like that was my dropping off point. The movie was my dropping off point. Like the original cast had basically gone away except for Kimberly and Billy. Tommy, of course, was a great addition. But he still wasn't part of the original cast.
Sure.
So, it's like, this was like literally the swan song for me. Like the movie was it for me. So this was like the last good memory that I had of the Power Rangers. So I just, sat back to watch it and enjoy it for what it was. And I was able to do that, but also like it was very hard.
Yeah. So, And so once again, the reviews of this game when it came out are again mirroring pretty much what we said already. Again, they're very average.
Yeah.
EGM was pretty harsh on it. They gave it like a 5.8 out of 10. Whereas GamePro actually gave like a higher score than that. So it's like, but again, it's like they said the same things. 2-player mode, I'm sure, also adds on. For some gameplay also with this, I think, because being able to play versus and co-op for any game.
I was gonna say any game that has co-op, absolutely, that's a plus. And I mean, that's something that should have been in the first game. So that's another thing that I tack on as far as like this was obviously the things that you would do in a sequel. They did. They checked all the boxes.
Exactly. Yeah. I would say that one of the reviewers could call this like a fighter. One of the reviewers call this like a Final Fight clone, which is like I think I can agree with that because it's like so it's like you want a game like that, which that's a bit easier. I think it's like a good game. You'll get into play. I think this is still like a decent game. Obviously, again, for all these games, a fan's going to enjoy these a lot more than non-fan. Yeah. But I think like a fighting game fan, at least I think there's enough here. At least here, I think to pick it up, to play it through once or twice, have fun with it. They'll be happy with the experience.
Yeah.
So I mean, the first game, I felt that way also. But I think it's stronger with this game. This game definitely, I think it's like. Obviously, for all the reason we mentioned, this game's a better experience.
Yeah,
so.
I mean, this doesn't come across as it does come across as a Power Rangers game, obviously, because of the aesthetic. But technically, you could throw any coat of paint on this game, and it's still going to be a decent game.
Right. Just to mention the Genesis version of this game real quick. I wish I had time to play the Genesis version. I meant to check that out, and I just spaced it because this week wasn't for me at work. So, do you have experience the Genesis version of this game?
I do not.
Joe?
Like I said, this was kind of my swan song. So by the time the Genesis game came out, like I had other things I wanted to play.
Just want to mention the Genesis version of this game real quick because it was developed by a different company than Natsume, and even though it has more in common with the Super NES game than the first game did, the Genesis version in some ways sounds like sounds like a better version of the game because it's like even though it only has 6 stages as opposed to 7. It covers more enemies. The Genesis version has more movie elements in it than Super NES one does. It also has 9 Rangers to pick from, like its roster.
Wow.
So it also they also have voice clips. So and it also has Zords in it. So. I think that the company who did the Genesis version was more inspired by the movie than Natsume was for the Super NES version of the game.
Yeah.
For whatever reason, it's like you can argue which one's a better version of the game while they did it or whatnot. But obviously they like the movie better than I guess Natsume did. So I just want to mention that here as a curiosity. So so. Now, the last game, Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, the Fighting Edition, this is a totally different kettle of fish.
Oh yeah.
This came out only on Super NES. Like the last game was available in both. Was available in North America and Europe. Came out in September 1995 in North America. This was the last game. Well, I don't know when the racing game that you mentioned before came out, but it was the last. It was the last like fighting game for this flight of the console.
This was the last game that featured the Power Rangers that you would know from the first 3 seasons, the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, because after this they became it was Mighty Morphin Power Rangers like Turbo and Zeo and
most of the cast changed after season 3, right?
Correct.
This game's in some ways what Genesis got a few years earlier, like the first game. Because obviously Bandai's like, we didn't have a fighting game on Super NES. Let's charge Natsume to make one. So, curiously enough, however, there is a bootleg Genesis port of this game exists. So who actually made it is unknown.
Interesting.
So, that is interesting. Yeah. So, it plays a lot like other typical fighting games of the time period because 95 this was probably like peak fighting game rage. I mean, like in the arcades. So, the game doesn't do anything special. But as far as like a fighting game, it's competent enough. It looks pretty good. You have your basic, you're basically, you get to basically like 2 or 3 match gameplay, standard special moves. 4 basic attack buttons. Like special moves like unique to each character. One thing I did like that I can't remember other games doing is like you can grab and throw your opponent like other games.
Yeah.
But if both folks try to do it at the same time, they wrestle each other instead until one overpowers the other, which I thought was a nice touch.
Yep.
So, so what's unique about this game is like the whole Super Meat. This game uses, aka the Vitality gauge.
Yes.
Do you want to try to explain this, Joe?
So you fill up a meter, and as you fill up this meter, basically it enables you to do things like super combos, which are super difficult. I haven't actually been able to pull them off myself because this game really comes down to the timing. And I love that aspect of it, but also like that's the crux of it as well.
Yes. So it does. Yes. So it does take a bit to get the hang of for sure because it's like. Do you remember playing like the Godzilla game, the Super NES?
Yes.
That had the meter. Yep. During the battles, the Godzilla's meter was always like rising and falling. Yep. Same thing happens this game. The meter's always like filling and resetting. So. But actually, now that I think about it, Darkstalkers did something similar to this too, right?
Yeah, they have the dark
game,
meter that is implemented.
Yes,
so it's kind of the same.
So if you can perform a special when the meter's full, it's like a stronger version. It's a stronger version of the move. And if you do if you pull off like 3 full power moves, that puts you in the super mode instead. So I also should mention in this game actually you're playing not as a character, you're playing not as a character themselves, but you're playing the character Zord.
Yes, these are all Zord or what a lot of people would call the grow up versions of the monsters because Rita used to yell make my monster grow and throw her staff and it would hit the ground and it would cause the monster to grow, so that's where we come up with the grow up situation. But yeah, this not only do you have that, which is fantastic, you have 3 modes. You got 2-player versus, which is of course fantastic if you got someone to play with. Because 2 people button mashing is much more fun than 1 person button mashing.
Right.
You have the trial mode, which is basically the arcade mode of this game. And you'll go through all 8 fighters and kind of like Mortal Kombat style, just one after another. And then they have story mode, which story mode is fine. You get some cutscenes here and there, but like it's very limited. You are either the Thunder Megazord or you are the Mega Tiger Zord, and that's it. Those are the only 2 choices.
Yeah, I was going to mention that. I don't know. Yeah, that's weird because the roster is 9 people in it altogether.
Right.
Which are all from the second and third TV shows, like one I understand. But it's like only having 2 of them available in story mode. It's like what's going on with that?
So my thought on that is that clearly they only built the story mode for the heroes. So the heroes at the time would have been the ninja, Mighty Morphin Power Ranger, like the ninja interpretation that came out after the movie. So new Zords, all that other stuff. They make the Thunder Megazord, and Tommy Oliver, of course, has the Mega Tiger Zord. So it makes sense in that context. But I also feel like, why did you only make a story mode for just the quote unquote good guys and not build a one that could be used for like the villains, and you could take a couple of villains and go fight the Power Rangers, because they have quite a few Zords in this game. So like they shoehorned stuff in here. Let's put it that way.
Yes.
To be able to make a roster. But like it's not horrible. So like you have 8 playable fighters. You have the Thunder Megazord, as mentioned. You have the Mega Tiger Zord, as mentioned. You have Lip Sync Kerr, who is a villain. You have a Ninja Megazord, which is the good guys. You have a Shogun Megazord, good guys. You have Silver Horns, who was also in the Power Rangers movie beat 'em up game. You have Goldar, who's from the original series, and then we don't have Rita Repulsa here because we're like entrenched in that third season. So Lord Zed is now the big bad, and then ultimately the final boss, because this is so close to the Power Rangers movie, is Ivan Ooze.
All right.
And Ivan Ooze is the only one that's not playable, which I found very interesting because I would think
there is a code. There's a code.
Okay, because I was thinking like
yeah.
You would think if you go through
like most
story
fighting games,
mode
there's a code,
and
yes.
you beat story mode, or even if you beat arcade mode, like you would at least unlock Ivan Ooze, but
You do, but it's hard. You have to,
Yeah.
I'm sorry, but literally hard mode. You have to beat story mode and hard mode to get the code to play as Ivan Ooze.
Okay, that makes sense. And to be fair, like I don't think it's worth it. Like don't get me wrong.
Online, so.
Like this is a good fighting game, and once you get the mechanics down, this is like a really fun game. I would almost go out to say that this is probably one of the best fighting games on the Super NES.
That's high praise.
Because I really like the mechanics. The weight of your character is really felt. Like you feel like you're.
I thought they kind of moved kind of slow,
mech.
sluggish to me actually because of that. Maybe it, I guess that was on purpose because of the weight thing that you mentioned.
See, so that was my thing. So like obviously, it moves a bit slow, but I also feel like that's how this should feel because you're a big, giant metal robot. You know what I mean? Like you're not going to be doing like crazy jump kicks and everything else. And that's why I think the timing meter and being able to pull off combos is so important. And just to show how good of an engine this is, a year later, they released Shin Kido Senkei Gundam Wing Endless Duel in Japan, because at that time, Gundam Wing was not popular in the U.S., and they used this engine for that fighting game, and that one, in my opinion, is the creme de la creme of fighting games on the Super Nintendo.
We'll have to cover something.
So that's why this one gets the high praise that it does, because the predecessor that comes from this game is, in my opinion, the best that there is to offer on the Super Nintendo.
Okay.
But it's the same thing, Gundams, like, they're giant mechs. So it still has that slow prodding feel, like you feel the weight of the mech, but it's still like got the timing meter. It's slightly different for the Gundam game. And like I said, like you get some cool like cutscenes of like the Megazord cutting down the bad guy and they blow up and whatever. Like that stuff, I don't care who you are, that stuff's cool. So
yeah, sure. Once again, I agree with a lot. Once again, I agree with a lot. Like you said, I guess you and I are like on pretty similar wavelengths today. I think this may be the first game that actually had like a trial mode in it. I think I'm not sure, but this is the earliest one I can remember that had the earliest one that came out as far as release year that had that mode in it, which is like pretty cool. So
yeah. I mean, it's it's essentially the single player, option, other than story mode, so that you can feel
exactly
how all the other characters play. But yeah, like it's technically arcade mode, but it's called trial mode because it's designed for you to get used to the mechanics of all 8 fighters that are available to you. So this way, when you do play a 2-player versus, you whoop your friend's butt.
Yeah. Right. Well, I mean, like, you can practice in fighting mode, but the advanced trial mode, I think, like, is challenging you to get as far as you can, like, about losing. So, the that's a good way to be able to see. I think I agree with you about story mode. Story mode was fine, but I think the actual single player, at least, you're going to get more gameplay playing trial mode. I think.
Yeah, absolutely.
But yeah, it's like at first I was playing I was complaining like how how slow and sluggish the fighters seem. But then I had the same thought that you just did. It's like, okay, well they're in these giant robots that makes sense. So the sound effects were recycled from past games, which I'm like, okay, I'm okay with that. The music at least though was pretty good. I thought. Graphics I thought in this game were mixed bag. I did like how large and detailed that the character sprites were. The effects of the combo moves and special attacks are very nice. But I did see some choppiness like the animations. Like I do this game. So,
yeah, but I think that also comes with the size of the sprites.
Could be, yeah. The backgrounds were also pretty uninspired. I thought. I mean, compared to games like Street Fighter and the Oak, it's like the backgrounds of this game were just afterthoughts.
So my thought is that they put so much detail into the sprites for the fighters that if they had done the same and put that much detail into the backgrounds, there would have been even more slowdown.
Yeah. I mean, this is. This is a mid-tier Super. Like a mid in life cycle development Super NES game. So it's what was that? What was that late Street Fighter game covered recently that came up very late in the system?
Street Fighter Alpha 2.
Yeah, Alpha 2. Yes. It's if this game come out a couple years later, maybe it could have been more like that game. But I think when it came out, that's a great point that you made.
I mean, when we finally cover the Gundam game, we have quite a bunch of stuff to cover, so it'll be a while before we get to the Gundam game. But when we finally get there, you will see they figured out what they were doing, and it was a much smoother experience. It still has that heavy weight of fighting with a mech, but you don't see that slowdown. The backgrounds are much more detailed. The Gundams themselves are much more detailed. They were able to up everything to the point where the first port of this Gundam series to the PlayStation just looks like an upgraded version of the Super Nintendo version because they did that good of a job.
Okay. Yeah. Well, again, Natsume knew what they were doing. This is we don't know many of their games here in the West, except for Harvest Moon and Wild Arms. I'm sorry, wrong franchise, not Wild Arms.
Wild
Guns. Those names so similar,
Yeah.
but anyway, so they definitely in Japan they came out with many more games. So it's this is a very experienced developer who knew what they were doing on the Super NES. So Bandai tapped a very good company to make these games. Overall, I thought this game was good. Where I disagree with you slightly, Joe, is the fact that I think that there's some Mortal Kombat Street Fighter games in the system that are better than this is, to me at least. But having said that, I thought this was a very good beginner's fighting game because I was able to button mash pretty far in this game.
Yeah.
So it's not easy. But I think it's a very good beginner fighting game as far as trying to get the hang of how a fighting game works and mechanics and combos and whatnot. And it's almost kind of like learning to drive on a stick shift, going to an automatic. If you learn to play on this game with its slow plodding mechanics, when you get to a more fast-paced game like Mortal Kombat Street Fighter, you'll be I think you'll be a much better player. Because you learn how to play these games operating under limitations. So, I did very enjoy that. I think again, it could have been better, but it could have been a lot. It could have been better, but it could have been a lot worse. And believe me, there are worse fighting games than Super NES. We've already covered some of them. So, but so it sounds like. It sounds like out of 3 games, this is your personal favorites.
Yeah, definitely. I thoroughly enjoyed this one a lot more than the beat 'em up. Don't get me wrong, the beat 'em ups were fun, but it's like I said with the first game, it's very repetitive. it wanes on you, especially through 7 levels, and then you're doing that for another 7 levels for the movie game. Like, by the time I was done with, because I played these in order, so playing these 2 beat 'em ups and then going to the fighting game, like the fighting game was just a breath of fresh air. And that might be just me coming from the angle that I am, why I feel what I feel. But having played the Gundam game and knowing what this engine would become, I think also helps as far as maybe my rose tinted glasses as far as the Power Rangers.
I also want to mention. Right, yeah. So I also want to mention real quick, because I don't think I touched upon this enough. The music in all 3 games I thought was pretty good. Especially the second game, since they took some elements. Yeah. Like the show soundtrack, but the music in this game I thought was excellent. It really was for a fighting game, it's very strong, surprisingly strong soundtrack.
Agreed.
It's probably a better soundtrack than deserves to be in a game like this.
Yeah, absolutely.
But yes, I was surprised at how good the music was. And again, reviews for this game back in the day were again mixed. GamePro gave it 11.5 out of 20. M Games gave it a very low 44%. I don't think the game deserves to be scored that low. I mean, it does have issues, sure, but it's very competently programmed and put together. The reasons that we mentioned before.
Yeah.
So,
I feel like a lot of magazines by 95 going into 96, they were tired of the licensed video game, that was going on. It was if it's licensed, they're reviewing it low, whether they're putting effort into playing the game or not. That was just what I, see in hindsight looking at some of these magazines.
Sure, right. And again, like I said before, whether fan versus non-fan is going to have different opinions on these games, of course. Yeah. So it's like like you said before, Joe. Nostalgia and familiarity with the show and the characters will of course excuse some bad things. Correct. But I'm guilty of the same thing with the franchises I love as well too. So it's there are some Star Trek and Star Wars games that I know are not very good, but because because they contain elements of the franchise, I still like them. But I think all 3 of these games, I think a non-fan of the game can still have fun with these games. I think. I mean, they're not masterpieces, but considering what they were, let's face it, they're essentially cash grabs. Yeah. So, but at least not to be, not to be put some tension and character to the game.
Yes, and that's just it. They're competent cash grabs.
Yes.
Yes. That's the thing, and
they could have been a lot worse.
Yeah, exactly.
we will see later on in this podcast tying games that are much worse. Yeah. So, okay, so codes and cheats for this game. I'm not going to mention the passwords that are commonly available. That you get. The first game, Power Rangers. There is the Japanese version of the game has the code you can access you can use the main menu to access the sound test for music and different sound effects. Why the U.S. version didn't have this, I don't know, but there are also 3 hidden Megazord battle passwords you can also use in this game. To trigger Zord versus Blue Silver Boss, Zord versus Boss Level 6, and Zord versus Final Upgraded Golden Boss. So the movie has a code to give you a power-up code. It essentially will super power up your character that you can do on the main menu. So. And the Fighting Edition has, of course, being a fighting game, has a bunch of codes. Because, of course, fighting games always have a bunch of codes. There's the code to play Zyve News, as we already mentioned before previously. You can also enable CPU mode if you want to. If you want to, just want to watch the CPU fight fight itself. So, eBay was a bit of a problem with this because it's the naming is so similar. I just want to add in a huge a huge grain of salt here. I did the best I could with sorting this out. Because of the multiple versions of the name and multiple consoles the games were released on, trying to sort through all this stuff was like a nightmare. So I did the best I could. I did the best I could with like listings and. But please take the number of copies available, and the pricing with a grain of salt. The pricing at least I feel somewhat accurate about. But again, these prices. Maybe you may be able to find a bit cheaper depending upon how you search because again the naming system for this is a nightmare. So having said that, the original game seemed to be the hardest to find on eBay. I could only find 7 copies of the game currently listed, and only 1 copy of the game sold recently. The card only priced like $15. So. There are CIB copies of the game currently available for sale. People are asking like $40, $60, like this game CIB. So I think altogether those prices are pretty decent. $15 for a cart. With like movie version of the game, that's a bit more common. 2 copies of the game were currently listed on eBay. 21 copies of the game recently sold. This is more expensive. Probably because the game was not available, was not made in as big of a print run, and/or it may just be a better game, so therefore higher prices. Card only prices of this game sold anywhere from $37-$70, and 1 CIB copy of this game sold for a whopping $485. So this one at least was more rare in CIB form. Fighting Edition was the most common to find on eBay. 2 copies, they're actually the same rarity as the last game. 2 copies are listed currently as the time of doing research. 20 copies like our research recently. Pricing's a bit cheaper. This is like the mid-price range game as far as the trilogy goes. Carts sold after $24 cents, $57, and 1 CIB copy of the games are recently for $3 and $15 online. So it's like. Cart pricing's a bit expensive overall I thought, but not out of line. I mean, this is a franchise that still has a very passionate fan base today. As we just said, these games do have nostalgia, and they do, and they were competently programmed. So I can understand the higher prices.
Yeah, absolutely.
And of course, they probably could release a collection pack of these games if they wanted to. Bandai could strike a deal with Natsume to do this if they want to, I guess. But these games have not been re-released. So, I don't know. A collection probably could happen. I guess it would depend on the rights issues because, what about the actors who like to scissor in the games and their voices in the games? Some of these people sadly are no longer with us. How do you get around that?
Yeah, and with it being the 30th anniversary this year and nothing being announced yet,
which I'm surprised by.
Yeah, I'm actually surprised there wasn't something like this that might drop. Because I thought, with the Castlevania collection and the Contra collection, that kind of set a precedent. Like, okay, well, you're going to do a retro compilation or something like that. That's the way you would do it. And Power Rangers, you could have that compilation that would include all the Super Nintendo, Sega Genesis, Game Gear, Game Boy, the Sega CD game if you really wanted to.
It's a bit more difficult for this because I mentioned before different companies work different ports, but you definitely could at least do the Natsume Super NES games. But but again, I think it's because I think licensing. Licensing may be the factor that's come into play. Licensing like real difficult sometimes. If they want a great example of that, look at GoldenEye. It took 26 years, for the game to get re-released. So again, because licensing problems. So they could be a real problem to work out sometimes.
Absolutely.
But anyway, so I don't know. I enjoy these games like what they were. I think probably I'm sure you probably got them. I'm sure you probably got more German out of this than I did because you're nostalgic with it. But as a newcomer looking into it, I thought these games were fine. I mean, they're cash grabs, and they could. and they could have been better, but they also could have been. But boy, they could have been a lot worse.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I'm glad. I'm glad. I'm glad when the better companies like Natsume actually develop these.
Sure.
It's like, like Natsume does not. Natsume does not get enough credit, I think, for how good of a company they actually are as far as developing and publishing games. Because again, like I said before, most of their games have not come out in the West. So. And then like the games that have come out here are very limited in scope, like Harvest Moon, which I know Joe's not a big fan
that one
of.
is Rune Factory, not a fan.
But spoiler, we are covering Harvest Moon on this podcast later on this year. So I hope you I hope you at least give it like a fair shake.
Oh, it'll get a fair shake. I promise you that.
But anyway, so thank you again always for joining us in this podcast. I very much appreciate it. If you have any questions, comments, feedbacks, please feel free to send us an email at the SNES Podcast yahoo.com or also post a comment on our Facebook group. Like I mentioned, we do have a lot of games planned up this year, but we always have room to take fan suggestions, ideas, etc. So, Joe, what can they reach you at?
You can find me. I have a very public Facebook. Also Twitter at JOESUX30. And check out Radical Retro Roundup. It's still a thing.
Yes. Yep. Very good. So, very weird sometimes, but very good. So next time we're covering a game that I've actually wanted to cover for quite a while. I just never got around to it. We're covering Super NES port of the classic, well, I'm not really quite sure how to call it. Follow up to Out of This World, Flashback: The Quest for Identity, which is like a very rotoscope action / adventure game. I guess the best way to describe it. So we're gonna. Have you played this game before, Joe?
So I actually bought this for the Switch when they released. I don't know if this is supposed to be like a remaster or a straight port. I don't know because I haven't had a chance to really sit down and play it.
Yeah.
So that is the answer. I have not played this yet. But I did buy the remaster. So I plan on playing both simultaneously and see what those differences are. But I'm looking forward to it. This is very much, from what I've seen, in the vein of the original Prince of Persia, which at the time when I had my first PC, I was pretty excited for.
It also has a lot of common without. Yeah, it also has a lot of common. That also has a lot of common, like Out of This World. Like, played that.
Yeah, and I haven't even touched that game, so this will be a fun one.
Yeah, that's also a great game. We covered that. We covered that in a past podcast. I've never played Flashback Super NES. My experience with it was on the PC. Nice. So I'm curious to see how this port works and how they were able to cram it into the cart. So look forward to that next time, folks. As always, thank you for listening to the podcast. We very much appreciate it. Stay safe, be well, everybody, and we'll catch you again next time. Later, all.
Bye.
Nintendo controls 80% of the video market. But no matter how you play the game, or which game you play, things definitely have come a long way since Pac-Man.
Now you're playing with power. Steampunk.